Before we start today's episode, I would like to remind our listeners that we're now on Patreon. You can find us at patreon.com/theknomads. Patreon is a platform where our listeners who are already part of our family can support us by making generous donations. Of course, there are multiple subscription options available, with each having its own perks. As always, I would like to take this moment to thank our listeners. You motivate us to make more content, and your support is invaluable. Now, let's move on to the episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Knowmads podcast. I'm your co-host, Bhavya.
And I'm your co-host, Prachi.
Political discussions and associated ideologies almost always resolve in thinking about national leaders and the large-scale effects of policies that finally lead to geopolitics. The conversations often lack the microscopic details and the penetrative effects of policies at the lowest local level, where, in principle, it actually matters. Studies suggest that such discussions amongst young students who are these future leaders are completely missing in recent times. The drive and the necessity of social acceptance and the high sensitivity surrounding these topics renders the young mind extremely hesitant and sometimes completely helpless. In today's episode, we aim to break apart this notion. Our guest today is a third-year physics graduate student at the University of Houston. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in physics and astronomy from Emory University. His research is in experimental particle physics, and he specializes in designing and building equipment and systems for highly sensitive particle detectors. Daniel shares with us his true opinions about recent American educational policies and how that affects lives of graduate students. And since it's not possible to not talk about physics on the Knowmads podcast, we talk about the current state of dark matter detection in the community. So, let's go.
Daniel Huff, welcome to the Knowmads podcast.
Hi, thank you guys for having me. This is so cool.
As an American physics graduate student, your expertise lies in the field of science. But today, we want to discuss the intersection of science and politics. So, American politics often involves debates on topics like funding for scientific research, technological advancements, and space exploration. As someone with a background in physics, how do you think these issues should be prioritized, if you think they should be, and addressed in the political landscape?
That is a great question. This is something that I've thought about a lot, especially as kind of deciding what maybe field of physics I wanted to go into, especially as an undergraduate. I always knew from a young age that I loved space. I had a birthday party at the museum in my hometown in the space exhibit when I was a child.
Right.
And this is a question that I kind of got stuck on sometimes, kind of holding me back was, okay, space exploration is amazing and I love it and it's awesome, but is it really helping anybody?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is it really a good use of my time? And to be honest, I think I land somewhere in the middle. Obviously, I think there are issues on Earth that are maybe more pressing and might deserve more time and attention. But I would also point out, I'm sure you have heard all these stories of all the amazing developments that came out of the space race. A lot of them are mostly, inventions and things, but things we use every day, like even, like mattress technology and stuff like that was greatly improved just by needing it for the space race. And
That's right.
I think in more what I do now, being a little bit more focused on particle physics, I think I feel even more strongly about that is, if we can crack into deeper layers of the standard model and we can, uncover new laws of physics, of course we can apply those in even more useful ways than just, hey, we came up with a pen that works in space, right? We can, develop, one of my colleagues works on medical imaging technology that's very much grounded in the work we do in our lab. So
Right.
To bring it around to an answer, physics itself clearly contributes so much to everyday science. Are there sometimes, explorations and things we want to study that maybe are not like super relevant to everyday human life? Of course. And should those things maybe get less funding than other projects? Yeah, I think they probably should. But at the end of the day, we're always going to wonder things. I mean, that's the nature of being a scientist. Maybe other people don't feel this way, but I know you two always have bigger questions. And you know, we have so many problems to solve here on Earth, but I don't think we necessarily neglect those just by asking other bigger questions. I think we can serve ourselves in that way too.
Right.
That's a nice way to put it.
Thank you. And it really is something I've thought about before. So very, very pertinent question.
So, I mean, just adding on to that, when you're deciding, you know, what questions need to be addressed and how much weight should we give to one, this is basically ground up from the graduate student, you know, viewing the world inside out.
Right.
How does a graduate student think about, you know, policies and politics entering into these things?
You know, unfortunately, I think a lot of the times the reality of our lives is that we can't as grad students. I'm sure you two have felt this way as well, that there have been times when I've kind of felt like, okay, you just need to like do what you need to do to get your degree. I think sometimes we see the degree as the opportunity to do what we want, ask the questions we want. But at this stage in our lives, sometimes I think it feels like we don't have that much choice, that much opportunity. And I don't think it should be that way. I think we should have the freedom to pursue what we truly want. I don't know if anyone ever told you, you know, in thinking about picking a major or a specialty or even an advisor, hey, you know, you might need to compromise a little bit. And sure, you compromise on what hours they want you to work, and you compromise on where your funding comes from. But one thing that I wish we didn't have to compromise on sometimes is what are you actually researching? And personally, I'm doing work that I love, and I would be happy to continue doing it in the future. But I wish we had more of an influence over things like policy and could say, especially as the foot soldiers of science, I mean, the ones doing so much of the day-to-day work and, you know, polishing all the papers and scrubbing all the data, I think we would have a good perspective for the higher ups, you know, these mythical admins in closed door meetings, if they wanted to ask us and say, what should we be dedicating our stuff towards? And, you know, all respect to how hard all our professors and mentors worked. They clearly have good ideas for the direction of science, but I also think that once you've specialized as much as they have, it's probably pretty difficult to take a step back and say, hey, maybe my field's not as important. You know, I think you'd be hard pressed to talk to a professor who says, yeah, they can cut funding for my field. I think it'll be okay.
That's so true.
That's right. So I want to talk to you about this HEROES Act from 2003. It's the Higher Education Relief Opportunities for Students. And without getting into much details about the act, but the idea is to provide relief to students. And in recent times, I mean, was recently implemented like when it was a national emergency, COVID, and then now it has seen a lot of opposition, you know, a lot of opposition from leaders, politicians. Yeah. So as a graduate student, what do you essentially see? How do you approach these economic considerations by the legislation, and you know, also keeping in mind that, you know, relieving students of their debt could be beneficial, and this is like if I remember the numbers right, it was $400 billion, so about $20,000 to $30,000 per borrower. So it is a big number. Yeah. But I mean, relieving students of that burden could be helpful. Yeah. So what do you think about this?
So first of all, I'm glad you don't ask me to go in on the specifics of the act.
Yeah, it's fine.
Because the details elude me, but it is something that has been interesting to think about, especially, you know, I've lived in the United States my whole life. I've always gone to public school. I did go to a private university for my undergrad, but then also my mom worked in education the whole time I was growing up. So it's been something that I've been able to watch in my lifetime. I mean, the very people that specifically the Biden administration is talking about relieving debt for are us, right? I mean, and older. There are still plenty of people paying off a lot of student debt. Right. So, and again, all of this is understanding from my perspective, and much of it is my opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. We want you to speak for a graduate student.
Yeah, so. I'll speak for all of them. Yeah,
yeah.
I think it would mean a lot, and I think it would be a really helpful thing to do. So the way that I understand what's happened lately is through the HEROES Act, there were kind of two pathways that could have been taken. It had been, I don't want to say a promise, but let's say, a proposal of Biden since before he was elected president that he would target debt relief. It's a thing that's very commonly pitched on the liberal side of politics in America right now. And so, again, maybe not a promise, but something he talked about for a while. And then when it came time to kind of take action on it, the way I understand is that legal scholars saw kind of two pathways for him to do it. And they tried one, and it didn't work out. So the Supreme Court just a couple weeks ago basically said, and the root of the argument against it is that he doesn't have the authority to do what he did. So their argument was essentially that despite this law, the law allows you to, change things, fiddle with things. But basically they said what you're trying to do is too much of a change. It exits the scope of the law. Right. You don't have that power, basically. So it's not even necessarily that they said, we don't like this or this is a bad idea. They may have those opinions. They don't usually share those with us. But what the court's ruling said was, you don't have the power to do this. Now, again, one thing that I've heard, not an expert on this, is that a lot of people argue that the other option for debt relief might actually be legally more sound. Okay. So you'll hear in coming weeks, and maybe even, so I've already heard whispers about it, they're going to try again. It may not be the exact same way. They may not, it may not be the same amount of money. They might have to get creative about it, but there's going to be another phase of this debt relief attempt, is what I understand. Okay. And a lot of people have expressed they think this one is more likely to work out. So anyways, getting away from kind of the mechanics of it, all that I've heard and seen growing up is how expensive college is getting in this country. And the data backs it up too. I was just looking at this this morning. So in roughly a 30-year period, so from between now and like the early 90s, tuition prices have roughly doubled. Right. And that's including adjustments for inflation. That's not the raw numbers. That is adjusted for inflation. I think the average lay somewhere around 15,000 or so, maybe 20,000 in the early 90s. And now it's up towards, double that. So 30, 40 plus $1,000 a year for tuition. Because that's adjusted for inflation, that's a lot scarier to me, because you can't just say, well, things get more expensive over time. The other reason that it concerns me, and so if you haven't figured it out already, I'd put myself firmly on the pro-debt relief side, is because, in my opinion, wages haven't kept up with that. Right. And so that's the frame that I come at this argument from. And I can address some of the other side's arguments about this, but the way I see things is, growing up in this country, going through a big financial crisis in 2008, having gone through another life-changing event with the pandemic over the past couple years, a consistent theme has been we're going through these big changes, but we're recovering. We recovered from 2008 crisis, and I think even the economy seems to be recovering from what I know. I'm just a physicist, from COVID, but the prevailing sentiment to me has seemed that wages have not kept up with that. Right. I don't have numbers to back that up, but I can tell you that the federal minimum wage has not been raised in a long time. Okay. At least a decade. The federal minimum wage hasn't gone up. That doesn't mean people aren't getting paid more. Like in my home state of Colorado, for example, the minimum wage there is higher than the federal minimum wage. So you have to make more than that. Right. And there are other complications. People can choose to pay you more than minimum wage. If you are a tipped employee in some states, you actually make less than minimum wage, but you earn tips. So maybe you end up making more in the end. So many moving pieces and parts to this, but the end result is, to me, the prevailing sentiment, and I think especially among academics, seems to be that the prices of good education in this country have gone up disproportionately. Long-winded way of saying that from me, but that's kind of where I come at this from. And so then my answer to that is, well, then why not debt relief, right? If truly things are disproportionate, they're out of control, unbalanced, then I think a correction would be great. I think it's warranted. And again, for the sake of disclosure, I'm someone who has no student debt at all. I was fortunate enough that my parents saved my whole childhood for me to go to college, and they were able to pay for that for me. And I'm incredibly privileged that I can say that. Yeah. As a PhD physics student, we don't pay tuition, and we're lucky that we work in a field that does that. If you were a law student, for example, you pay your own way. Now, there are scholarships that you can get for that, but it's not like our field where this is the standard rate. You work, of course, but you don't pay tuition for it. So That is to say, I'm not someone who really has a stake in the debt relief either way, but and maybe that makes it a more powerful position even then to say that I say go for it. I mean, this is something, this is debt that can follow people their whole lives. By the time you're done paying it off, the interest amounts can be pretty crippling. And especially for something like education, where the whole point is to set you up for your future, for your career. If you're incurring debt as an attachment to that education, well, it really undercuts the gains you're supposed to make from getting that education. Yeah.
So any comment about, let's say the debt is relieved. So, what about this increased national debt of...
that is something I should probably know more about, if I want to defend my position. And that's always, that's a good argument against it, is you can't just snap your fingers and create more money.
Yes, you're right.
Legally you can, but that's a slippery slope that causes inflation, and it can, people are worried it will trigger a recession because, big financial companies might struggle. That's totally fair. To me, however, I don't even feel right now as if enough resources are being put towards understanding those potential consequences. And I could be wrong. I'm sure there are people out there who are working on it, but political statement here, get ready for it. I don't feel like the opposition is even interested in hearing what it would take to get this done, from my perspective. And I could be wrong about that, but a lot of the argument I hear from people opposed to the debt relief is not focused on that point, which I think is a very good argument potentially against it, is it could be very expensive, damaging to the economy.
Right.
The sentiment I hear a lot more from, I don't want to say lay people like I'm some sort of elite politician, but from people, from family members and friends and people that I know, that the sentiment I hear a lot from them that I'm sure you've heard too is fairness, is, well, I paid my debt. My debt wasn't relieved.
Right.
How come their debt gets paid off? Right. That's what you do. You rack up a debt, you pay your debt. I would guess that the economic arguments are probably common in the political sphere and probably in the economic sector as well. And the reality is I can't speak to that. That might be a deal breaker right there. We just might not be able to afford to do it, or at least the way they want to do it. And that's something that I would want to know, and I'd want to face that before, it's not like we're going to vote on a bill for debt relief. We could maybe someday vote on an amendment or something. Probably not. This will probably just be done through Congress. Right. But if I were going to have a say in it or be picking a candidate who's advocating for it, I'd want to know that. I'd want to know, hey, the sticker price is pretty high on this, and it is. Excuse me, we know that. We know the price is potentially high. But here's what I would say against it, is it's an investment in something big. It is no different than when we pass a bill for $1 billion to improve our roads and bridges, like the infrastructure act that passed. To me, it's no different than when we, if we were to spend more money on American healthcare or, anything else that Congress approves spending for. I mean, that's what we're there for. And I think people underestimate. Many people think of it as sort of an individual issue. They relieve the debt. Sure, there are going to be a lot of individual happy people out there. But I think just as you can look at the sticker price of doing it, I think you could also hopefully look at the economic gains directly from it. It would be a huge transfer of wealth downwards,
right,
which would be incredibly helpful, I think, for the financial divide between people in our country. Is people who can already afford to pay off their debts might be a little grumpy that they had to pay their own money for it, but if you think about the people who are most in need of relief like this, it could be life-changing, and it would be a really good way to directly, things that people always talk about in government. Oh, we want to stimulate the economy, right? We want to create jobs. I don't know that act would directly create jobs, but it would certainly improve people's ability to find careers that they want without having to worry about how much money they're making, right? If they're, potentially without a house or a car or something like that because they're under this financial burden, it could help give them the leg up to get back into the labor market. I think a lot of these sort of, I'm blanking on the word right now, a lot of these kind of buzzwords that you hear about big government spending, I think could apply to this as well. I think a lot of us don't picture it that way, but I think it could.
Well, if I contrast that to, the way India sort of deals with not exactly the same situation, but very similar, is that I mean, we've sort of developed a way to figure out who can and cannot pay the debt. But I think at this point, when it's already happened, it's very hard to sort of, filter out people who can pay the debt and who can't.
Yeah, and the United States has a system like that as well. I mean,
Right,
the way
okay.
that federal student aid is based is it's a calculation of, what's your parents' income? Are you single parent household? How many children do they support? So when you fill out, I don't know if you've ever had to fill out the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. I don't know that we have to in our positions, but
I think we did.
but that's basically what it is
Right.
beforehand, before you would theoretically be paying for college, they try to figure out what you need and then they provide it.
I see.
The problem, as I understand it, comes in that two things. Number one, as I've said, the price of college is just going up. So they're just going to have to keep giving more federal aid anyways. In my eyes, it might be perhaps, if nothing else, more efficient to sort of reset the system and just say, hold on a second, while things are getting out of control, let's just kind of cool all the debt really quickly, and then that might be a good opportunity to reestablish this aid program. The other thing is, I really just don't think that the budget for that federal aid has really kept up with the prices of college. And I know for a fact, even if federal aid has increased commensurate to college prices, federal spending on education in general has not.
Right.
So overall, federal dollars put towards, we're talking about mostly public educations, but private educations draw federal funding too, has just not been anything impressive over the past couple decades. This is something that it's good to be tapped in. Like I said, my mom worked in education as I was growing up, and I talk about this with her a lot, about how a lot of sentiments towards education have maybe wavered in the past decades. I'm sure you two are well familiar with sort of what's going on in the state of Texas right now with how difficult they're finding it to hire teachers. Sure, we're talking about elementary, middle school, high school, right? We're not talking about college at that level, but you have to imagine if teachers are feeling at the primary level, if they're feeling that unappreciated, if they're feeling that underpaid, you have to imagine those sentiments probably aren't that different at the university level. So then the concern for me basically becomes, okay, so has education really been a priority for us in the past 10, 20 years? And those are the people we're talking about canceling the debt for.
Right.
Okay, you paid this ton of money in a year where we weren't spending anything on U of H, and the sticker price was high, and even, maybe even the quality of education wasn't even as much as you could have gotten in previous years. So if our government's not going to directly spend money on universities, funding them with, research grants and scholarship money and whatever, even if our current federal financial aid system is working as intended, it doesn't always feel like it's enough. Like maybe we need another action.
Right. But if I be the devil's advocate for a minute,
Yes,
a
please.
natural question arises that even if we, for example, nullify the debts of everyone right now, what about the future debt? Because essentially this country is known for people having their student debts. I mean, that's not I'm not even exaggerating this. So what about those people? I mean, we're talking about being fair, that someone was able to pay their debt. What about the future generations who will think, if you did it for them, why not for us?
Yeah, that's a great point. And to me, the answer to it is the educational policy that I'm talking about. I agree, it's not going to be enough to do one round of debt cancellation. It will bring up a lot of questions. So to me, then the answer is those missing federal dollars. What's the reason that debt is so overwhelming? This wouldn't be an issue if people were taking out those loans, going to college, and at an overwhelming rate finding successful careers to help them pay off those debts. Now, to be fair, I get the impression that the debt itself is a little bit out of control. It sounds like I've said, the price tag might be a little overinflated anyways, but let's just say, even if the price is fair, there are clearly still problems with people being able to pay it back in a significant way. So then that's when I say, that's totally fair. The debt cancellation probably won't fix that issue. And for some people, that's a reason not to do it. To me, that's a reason to do much more than just the debt cancellation. We need an overhaul. And
Interesting.
as an American, that gives me a lot of hesitation, because we don't change that quickly here. And I mean, we're talking about a huge investment in a system that is just not really how well. I have to stop the thought before I say it. I was going to say a huge investment in a system that we don't really treat that way, but we did. I would argue, as someone who is very skeptical of the American health system and the American economy, I would think that education historically has been something that I think we have cared even more about. I don't know that. I've only been alive for 25 years, right? I can't say, oh man, back in the 90s we cared so much about education. But I do think that most people in America would be more politically similar on issues of education than they think.
Right.
I do. And so that gives me some hope that if we were to propose not only a debt cancellation, or maybe instead of a debt cancellation, some sort of bigger educational system overhaul, people might actually support it. But to be honest, I think that's what I think is necessary, is more federal funding towards universities, even towards primary education. I would love to see, free preschool, universal preschool or kindergarten care, something like that. Improvements to things like family and medical leave, so that parents can, take time away when they have children to raise them, or improvements to childcare in the labor industry, so that if I have to work a job, my kid is still getting maybe not education, but at least
the care.
Yeah, at least taken care of.
Yeah.
I've found, well, I haven't found, but I've seen time and time again that studies on success in school can be traced back to parent availability in the household. And so I think that if we want to talk about, a bigger, broader plan that I would love to see put into action someday beyond just canceling debt, it has a lot of layers to it. Things like I said, like time off for parents, or support for housing, right? I mean, how valuable is it to a student to have a stable home that they can come back to and do their homework in, and talk to mom and dad. This is something that I feel very connected to. The work that my mom did growing up in schools was related to health and wellness, and so her job was to take the data from students on, how do you feel at home? How do you feel at school? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting enough exercise? I mean, there are so many ways you can come about this. When you talk about education, you have to realize that it oftentimes boils down to the entirety of raising a child. I mean, so much of your life is spent in school at those ages that if we really wanted to address that concern of, hey, canceling debt is kind of a Band-Aid, right? It's kind of a one-time solution. Well, then let's talk about that. Let's go farther than that.
Yeah. Interesting. So, being a part of the scientific community, have you noticed any prevailing attitudes or trends among your colleagues regarding political engagement? Like, do you feel more people in the physics community have started to have a conversation about politics?
That's a really interesting question. It's especially interesting to me because I've been in some different institutions in the past several years and just different scenarios. So my undergraduate institution, Emory, private institution in Atlanta, smaller than University of Houston, but I also just feel the culture is a little bit more politically engaged.
Okay.
Perhaps that's because now at University of Houston, we're in a small department and we're kind of not a closed community, but we spend all our time just in our department. As an undergrad, I'm engaging with the university system as a whole. But I still get the impression that Emory was a little bit more politically engaged. I think that we could do more as scientists. I really do. I understand the hesitation to involve. I feel that all the time. We think of science as being very neutral, right? That's the goal of a hypothesis, of a conclusion, is you're not seeking to prove something. You are testing and, confirming or not confirming, or you're rejecting or failing to reject, right? We're conditioned, and for good reason, we're conditioned to use this very neutral, pragmatic, technical language because that's what we need to do good science. So I understand the hesitation of scientists to become involved in a lot of political arguments because a lot of times, that's the whole nature of politics, is what do we want? What do we see as what's best for us? How can we improve our lives and the lives of others? There are ways you can incorporate science and statistics into that, right? You can say without bias or purpose or intention, hey, this economic action improved the median income or whatever, right? Or you can say this education bill saw test scores go up. We can deliver that data, but I do think that we could do more on, and I know it's antithetical in some ways to how we were trained, but delivering that data with intention. Not that we are skewing the results or presenting them in a certain light, but what questions are we even asking? You know, are we looking in the right places? I think maybe to me, one of the most successful marriages of science and policy has been in environmental issues. Now, I say successful despite the fact that we live in a city where people are fighting tooth and nail to undo or stop any sort of, you know, fossil fuel limitations.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think it has largely been a place where maybe I say it's successful because I feel scientists have been unafraid to get involved there. Are we always listened to? No, certainly not. But I don't think it would be taboo to, you know, start an environmental policy lab at a university. You know, we have an Earth and Atmospheric Sciences department on our campus, right? I think that's an area where we've found that this is something that is perhaps at a time could have been considered not political, but clearly today has become a very hot button policy related issue that we're neck deep in. I mean, even the three of us, even though none of us do anything that I think is you would think of being directly related to climate studies, I'm sure all of our work could be applied that way. I mean, that's kind of what I was saying earlier about are we asking the right questions? You know, is sure discovering dark matter isn't going to reverse climate change overnight, but who knows about, you know, discoveries about the nature of matter, or for what you work in, gravitation, or who knows what we could cook up, what impressive technologies we could come up with for monitoring or you know, cleaning and that kind of stuff. So to circle back to the root of your question, I hate to say just get more involved scientists, because I understand why we operate the way we operate, but I think that at the end of the day, if the questions you're asking don't serve a purpose that is helpful or you care about, then I think it's at least asking if it's worth asking the question.
That's an interesting take.
Yeah. Especially about the, you know, how scientists can, contribute towards these environmental policies and definitely other areas of politics.
I think a lot of times when you see scientists in a political setting, you see them as like witnesses, you know, you see them in hearings testifying. And they're very clean cut and polished, and they're usually just kind of presenting facts, which I think is the right way to do it. As the scientific community, we don't want to seem as though we are presenting foregone conclusions. We don't want to seem biased. We don't want to be biased. Right. But that doesn't mean we can't pick and choose where and when we are presenting, right? And what we're studying so that we can affect positive change. We're never going to hide the results because I want this to change and my data doesn't agree with changing it. We can't do that. We have to be careful about that. But we have to engage in the right conversations and maybe more of them, frankly.
That's right. I wanted to highlight a point that you briefly touched on, which was, the situation with teachers in Texas. So there was a recent study actually conducted by the National Center for Education Statistics, NCES, and they found out that there's an increased reliance on contingent faculty appointments. And there's a trend, there's a shift from full-time tenured professors to non-tenure/part-time appointments. This study is fairly recent. Yeah. And of course, there obviously exist disparities, you know, with underrepresented minorities and women having just part-time positions. Why do you think that is? Why do you think a situation like this, you know, a trend like this is seen?
The shift towards part-time positions?
Yeah.
My instinct, and perhaps a little pessimistic, would be because these are easier employees to get and get rid of. That would be my instinct. We all know the myth of the tenure track, right? How scary and intimidating it is, how difficult it is to obtain, but then how difficult it can be to remove faculty once they're tenured. Right. So I think that's probably maybe part of it is, you know, young professors who just want jobs to put on their resumes, just want to get involved in the academic scene, are probably more susceptible to taking part-time positions than maybe, you know, 50 years. I also think unfortunately, I think it's a trend that builds on itself. Right. Because the fewer tenured faculty there are, the less we come to expect that, and the more we will accept these temporary positions. So I think, you know, 50 years ago, you probably looked around and saw most of the faculty tenured and having very secure employment, and you said, I'm not going to settle for anything less than that. Right. Unfortunately, I think as soon as that trend starts to shift away, the problem I would imagine increases where, oh, half my department is temporary faculty. They're clearly not afraid to hire on that basis. I'm going to have to work a lot harder to get more than that. And,
Right.
I don't necessarily have any data or anything to back that up, but at least as someone potentially looking to go into academia, that's how it feels to me. Is the reality is it makes me feel a little bit more like disposable almost. I worry about it for the future of academic professionals. I want tenure someday. That would be amazing. And sure, there are pros and cons to it. But even if we go down like to the primary level, like we were talking about earlier, where there's not really this tenure idea, the elementary school that I went to, again, I grew up in a very nice, privileged neighborhood. So this is not going to be reflective of all places in the United States. The teachers who taught in my elementary school were all super old and had all been there forever. Oh, God. It gave me the impression that it was a very coveted job. They wanted to work there. So what's happening right now in the state of Texas to me feels totally antithetical to that. I know people even our age who are teaching in classrooms, which, isn't surprising. We all hold degrees, and we're, you and I, the three of us, we could have been in school long enough to get our teaching certificate. It surprises me because of how deeply I feel like they've become involved in it so quickly. And I have a friend who teaches in the area, I think 2nd grade, and has told me before about how her coworkers are also young. And that may just be a trend for Houston or Texas, but it strikes me as such a contrast to my primary education where everybody was so old and had been there forever. And there are definitely upsides to that, fresh perspectives. The training gets better. Who can say if educational practices from 50 years ago should really be taught anymore, right? But for the same reason, it makes me nervous about the longevity of those careers. Are we paying enough attention to teachers? Are we treating them nicely enough? Do they even want to stick around? Right. Could it be that the temporary positions are because they choose to leave? I don't know. Right. And then that would be addressed the same way as how do we make them feel welcome? How do we make them want to stay? How do we attract them? So, I acknowledge that probably seems like kind of a pessimistic answer. Oh, that's why we're moving that way. It could just be sign of the times. That's just how we're going to do things in the future. And it could work out great. It could be good for mobility for professors, not feeling like I have to stay at this institution because if I don't stay here, I'm not going to get tenure. That would be great to say I can work a couple years here and then I can move somewhere else. I've lived in 3 different cities in my young adult life, and I loved that opportunity. And that's something that if you want to sink an investment into a university, you can't really do that. Right. So there certainly could be pros to it, but I think we need to be careful to watch that it doesn't become sort of this. It doesn't lower the value of the labor.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we don't necessarily want them to become expendable.
Exactly. Yeah. We want it to be a position that, you see as being long. When people talk about becoming a doctor, you don't think, oh, they're going to do it for 3 years and then they're going to move on. Do people do that? Absolutely, they do. Yeah. But when you hear someone, going to a difficult professional school to do something like that, you think career.
Yes.
And I think it's fine if educators don't want that. I think they can also teach for a couple years and go do something else, or the opposite. But I think that it would be better for the profession if it were seen that way. If it were held in this, you want to be an educator, we're going to prepare you to do that for as long as you want, as long as you can.
Right. I mean, it definitely has a lot of pros when we consider the fact that how graduate students now who are, recently graduating are unable to find jobs because of these tenure positions. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, we cannot necessarily put yes, this is good, or no, this is not good kind of situation on that, because again, I mean, yes, I would like to have a tenured position, but I cannot have any position right now because of other tenured positions.
No, that's a great point. That's an excellent point. It's not just the fact that it might be nice to have a more temporary position, but that might be all that there is for us right now. And we've all heard stories of, ex-professor is tenured and probably should go, and how difficult that is. Right. I think, though, maybe the way to address that conversation is from the top down and start by maybe we could address tenure, period. Make it more sustainable for universities, perhaps. Maybe shorter is not the right word. Make it a little more flexible for the universities. But the compromise for that could be okay, you need to offer it to more people, right? If we're gonna open it up, we're gonna make it a little easier to come and go.
Yeah.
Maybe we're gonna make it a little bit of a more short-term process, or maybe the opposite. Maybe it needs to be a longer-term process. I don't know. But the compromise to that should always be, the educators need to have more of a seat at the table,
Yes.
and you need to understand that if we're going to relax how tenure works, we don't want that to be reflected as them being any less important to the system. And like I said, who knows? This trend might have no negative effects. It might work out. I think the three of us sitting right here right now don't feel like it's only a positive trend. I think
definitely.
as much as wanting tenure, I think we don't want to be bounced around between 8 postdoc positions over the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's right.
And then also if we do want to revisit how tenure position works, then another role comes into play as to how should the position be evaluated. Should it be someone who's still capable of teaching, or someone who's still capable of researching, getting stuff out of their graduate students and things like that?
No, I think that'd be a great place to start with revisiting this conversation. I don't know about you two, I'd be curious, but I fall frankly on the side of teaching. I think student evaluation should be, if anything, more important than it currently is.
Surprisingly, I would say that too, because especially coming from a theoretical point of view, we already know there's not a lot of funding, and funding essentially drives your research, drives the number of graduate students you can have, drives the amount of research you can give. But at the same point, teaching, I feel, is a good parameter to evaluate whether you're still capable of being in the university or not.
Yeah, and here's what I would say is, if you are a professor who just wants to do your research and we change the system so that you can't stay at a university unless you're teaching really well, there are other options for you. Now, academia is, I would say, by far the most common place for people, especially in our field, to end up. That's where a lot of us want to be. But if you got to the point where like, wow, I hate teaching and my evaluations are reflecting that, I think you have other options. My concern is those students may not have other options. The people you're teaching, if you get to a point where it's no longer the focus of your position at a university, you could do some damage to them, right? You could be teaching them important courses that they're missing out on, right? So
that's right.
Again, I'm a student right now, and so I think my bias is obvious that I would lean towards the perspective of give the students more of a voice in these decisions. And I know there are good faculty arguments. They're the ones with experience. They know better. They might have a better eye for what professors should stay and should go. They want control. It's their colleagues. They want more control over that. I get that. But again, like I said, I think once you're in the position of being evaluated, I think you already possibly have more options. And might it hurt the quality of research that some of us are doing? That's definitely possible. But I'm not as afraid of that because we've got national labs and we've got,
that's right,
whatever you think about it, we've got private companies that are stepping into a lot of these sectors to kind of fill in some of those gaps. So, and that's, again, what a wonderful way to tie it all back together. An investment in educational policy is, we love and respect the work that professors do. And the three of us wouldn't be here in Houston right now if it weren't for research at institutions. And there's a long history of wonderful research being done at institutions. That should not stop.
Yeah.
But maybe we need to raise the bar and say, if you're going to be participating in this, you need to be ready to teach as well.
Yes.
Maybe.
And there are universities that are solely focused on research. I mean, we can invest in more such universities so that it's easier for people who are in such a position to give space to others and find themselves in a position that they're more like to be in.
If that's what you're looking for and you know that going into it, that's great. I mean, if you want to go to a university like that, then I agree those should exist. And I don't know if you had any of these experiences. I probably only had maybe 1 or 2 undergraduate experiences where I felt like maybe my professor was not so interested in being there. They were not, impactful in a profoundly negative way to me. And so I don't imagine this is a problem that is ruining the careers of many students. But once again, I think it would be a good way to maybe sort of improve the quality of academics without having to promise tenure to everybody or something like that.
Right.
I mean, the world will only benefit with better science communicators and teachers, I feel.
Yeah.
That's very important.
There would be moans and groans and there are obviously consequences, but I think it's something that we could do pretty easily to help with some of the tenure-related issues we're having now. I think professors might just completely disagree with me. They might say the opposite. They might say, no, the requirements are far too strict. I need to be free to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
But as someone with a more student-focused perspective, I would say, I think if we tightened that up a little bit, and then think about the chain reaction, then, right? Then the students are learning from people more engaged in being there. People like us are studying under good teachers and mentors who can prepare us to be in those same shoes in the future. If you're learning under a professor who only wants to be in the lab, you'll probably become a skilled researcher. But then that may be the only opportunity that you have. Then what happens when you go to a university and you don't have a passion for teaching either? Do you perpetuate the cycle? Maybe, maybe not.
Yep. And now talking about give the students their voice. So you've played a major part in building the constitution for the physics graduate students. So now my question comes in three folds. First, I would like you to tell our listeners how important it is for students to form a student body. Second, what was your personal agenda behind forming the Constitution? And lastly, as a graduate student, all of us are a part of an extremely diverse department. So from your perspective, why is it essential to have a diverse and inclusive student body in a university?
I'd firstly like to say that was the smoothest transition of all time right there into that topic. That was wonderful. I didn't see that coming. That was wonderful. Okay, so your first question was...
how important it is for students to form a student body.
Okay, and then what was my objective, and then different voices. So I think it's absolutely critical. Surely you've cued into some of my other political leanings, especially as it comes to education. So this next part will come as no surprise to you that without the input of the students, the work and the progress of a university is meaningless. I mean, aside from just the fact that we do so much of the labor in our labs, in our research positions, and in the teaching. I mean, we provide the university with so much labor. Aside from just the fact that without us, that would be a pretty big void. We're not geniuses. We don't have all the experience, but we bring fresh ideas. We bring fresh perspectives. We look at things that have been looked at 100 times and can see something new. If we stop asking for the opinions and perspectives of the students, the youngest, what's the point in even teaching them then, right? Why don't we just have the people that know everything continue to run everything?
Right.
We have to continue to not just give knowledge to the students and to the young voices, but we have to continue to adapt to their understandings as well. So I think it's critical. I think it's very important. And I will say, to diverge a little bit from sort of the big holistic philosophical educational idea, to focus in on graduate students a little bit, I would say doubly so, because they're expecting us to be ready pretty soon here to step into those faculty and administrative roles. They're expecting us to be able to take the reins and lead. Now, soon, maybe not. Maybe more, 8-10 years down the road. We all know we're going to be in postdocs for 9 years or whatever. But still, what is the purpose of graduate school if not to make you from an educational, a smart person into a leader, into an operational person, into someone who can take knowledge and experience and do something with it. So if they're not listening to us, if we don't at least have a seat at the table, things are going to look very alien to us when we arrive in those positions. When we get to that point where we are the faculty and we are the administrators, if they're still doing things the same way they've always done them, we're going to say, what is going on here, right? This isn't like the tenure thing. We're going to say, what is this system? We had no input on this. It doesn't fit with us. And change is inevitable. Progress can never be stopped. No matter what, we will always have a say in the future. But I think especially for your grad students, if you expect them to get a mature experience out of their graduate school, I think you need to treat them with the level of respect and attention far above just student. And to their credit, I think University of Houston does a good job of that with us. I've always felt, frankly, treated like a grown-up here. But I think every university, or maybe not every, but I think all universities could do a better job at listening to us. And I'll segue that into your second question of what was my driving force behind this. Provide a little bit of a context maybe for what we're talking about. Within the past couple of years, our graduate student body voiced just some concerns that weren't really being met with our current representational structure. So issues they wanted resolved, changes they wanted made that just kind of couldn't go anywhere. We felt kind of hamstrung by the structure that we had. And so so some people were asking if we could maybe revisit it, and it was not my idea, though I did become highly involved in the process to draft a constitution for our fellow graduate students. And so, to answer your question, my driving force behind it is we are much scarier when we work together. So if we want them to listen to us, we have to be efficient and organized. And that's the same principle behind, I'll say the dreaded word, a union, but it's also the same principle behind, like sports teams and things like that, right? If
everything, I mean,
yeah,
there's got to be structure in order to...
Yeah. I mean, when was the last time you worked on a collaboration that didn't have like 10 extra people in it that just, so that's thing number one, is I knew that if, we're having these student body meetings and there's an issue here and an issue there, none of them are deal breaking, right? Nobody's having an issue that is so terrible and overwhelming, all of us are going to be affected. But there are enough problems that we're not going to fix the structure, I guess you could say, if we just play whack-a-mole and just hit them one at a time as they pop up. And to be fair, the work was not all that difficult based on some of the structure we already have. I'm grateful that the university, the department, had already given us a representative position. They've allowed us to have someone in the meetings there with them. But we're not taking advantage of that if we're not having conversations as a student body. Like I said, it's playing whack-a-mole. If that one representative is just hearing this complaint and that complaint, and then they go into the meeting and they say, I've heard A, B, C, and D, the faculty are going to pick the easiest one of those to get done and do it. They're going to pick the most terrible, horrible issue of all those and take care of it how they want to take care of it. Things are going to get done, but it has no direction to it, right? And it may not be something that we feel like we need personally from the three of us, or even as a student body, as a department. We may go 10 years down the road and say, actually, U of H is doing things really well and we don't need to change anything. But it's always too late to change something, right? As soon as you realize the problems are there, the fight is always going to be uphill. So right now, especially coming back to in-person learning after COVID, a lot of administrative things changed. It feels to me like the perfect time to introduce just some sort of twists, right? Some knots in how we operate. So the objective was just, without inventing anything new, and I was very committed to this, we're not going to make up any new rules because we don't have that power, right? The administration has told us we can have a representative or two. They were nice, said we could have two. If we try to go way beyond that, we're going to get shut down immediately. If we walk in there and then we say, actually, we have 4 representatives and also they get to vote on every new faculty hire, they're going to say, great, you now have 0 representatives. Have a nice day. So you take what you have and you get creative. You organize. You say, okay, well, let's elect this representative. Let's have all of us decide, right? If we're going to have 2 people speak for us, let's make it a good 2 people, right? Let's make sure they know what the issues that we want addressed are. I mean, this was a hugely collaborative process, as you know, over many different years of student, many different backgrounds, different labs, collaborated to think, what do we need in this? What kind of systems do we need in here? Other than that, it was just building the framework. And as you know, a lot of banging our heads against a wall saying, what are the logistics of this? I mean, if we're going to build a system here, it needs to work, right? This engine needs a lot of moving parts in it. So... that's the driving motivation. I can't even say that there were any big issues that I needed resolved. I've had a pretty good path through this department so far. It was hard to find an advisor. That's harder for some people than others. I didn't show up here with a good idea of what I wanted to do. So I feel like they could do a better job of guiding students towards labs. So there's something that I'd like addressed. I sure would kill for them to pay for my parking permit, But there wasn't even anything out there where I was like, we have colleagues who almost left the department and had catastrophic things happen where it's like, wow, they really needed someone to speak up for them. But even without having that, I feel as though I see the writing on the wall is sooner or later we're going to want this thing. And it would be better to have it in place before that time comes. Sorry, getting to your last question.
Yeah.
Diverse perspectives. Without a doubt, this department is the most diverse group I've ever worked in, which is really cool for me. Because my upbringing was not diverse at all. And, I couldn't control that, so it's not like I have guilt over that, but it does make me wonder, maybe what I missed out on. I grew up in a very white, American, affluent area, and I had a good time, clearly learned some physics from it, but Emory University was the first step for me in widely different perspectives. significantly larger international population than my hometown or my high school, for example. And stepping into this department in UH has been just something incredible for me. I mean, I can say without a doubt that I am a minority in the department. I mean, you could count on one hand the number of even just domestic students in our department, students from the United States. Yeah. And that to me has been an invaluable experience. And I've now having had that experience and finally kind of getting to put myself in those shoes of like, you know, you're not always going to be the loudest voice. It makes me realize just how lucky we are to have that and how important it is to maintain that, especially. I don't think that'll be hard at a school like U of H, and especially in a field like physics. I don't think America's behind on physics, but we're certainly not ahead on things like math. So I imagine that the flow of international STEM students will continue, and I think we need that if we want our field to survive, at least in this country. And representation is the way to do it. I mean, I'm not saying that professors or administrators are out there saying, oh, you know, we are going to stop letting in international students or anything like that. But I do think that if this is what our department looks like, the students, when we get into those positions, when we're the ones making decisions, we're not going to be afraid to say, you know, let's open the application up. Let's let these people in because they're qualified. Frankly, and I love all of my fellow domestic students very much, so I'm sorry that I'm saying this on the record, but I feel like the group of us are by far the dumbest in our department. I'm just saying, like, it makes me wonder so much what we're missing out on in places like where I grew up that is just so one-minded on, and again, that's different than college. I didn't apply to go to my middle school, right? That you just go where you live. So that is a more complicated thing to change, but especially at the university setting, if we can foster those kinds of groups and those kinds of conversations, plus that's how physics works. You know, I was in a meeting yesterday with people who are in Europe and people in Canada. That's how our science is done. If we don't maintain that environment in graduate student life, we're not going to be ready for what comes next.
That's right.
And I really appreciated those perspectives, focusing specifically on building this constitution, because just things like rules are just different everywhere. Mine is such an American constitution, the one that I wrote. I mean, the original draft of it is so red, white, and blue. But to have other considerations like, you know, what if voting works this way, right? Or what if a committee is built that way? Or here's this like just the way we think of things when it comes to discipline or whatever. If we lose that, we're not going to be prepared for what comes next.
So given your, super efficient and very much incredible involvement in this
Thank you.
Drafting of the Constitution and bringing everyone together, let's also talk about what really happened. Why did we see, we expected some amount of participation and we did not see that?
I think I've talked with you two about this a little bit, but we haven't really met since the end of the semester. And I don't want to be too harsh on us or on myself about it, but we did not get the result that we wanted. Unfortunately, we might have gotten the result we expected, but we did not have the levels of participation, and genuinely it was really disappointing to me. Again, to my fellow colleagues, if you're listening, that's not a criticism of you. You're busy. I get it. I am too. I think, we could maybe market a little more next time, get our messaging out there a little bit better. But I think one of the things I said earlier is just, you don't know you need these things until you need them.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's hard to rally the troops during peacetime. Again, not a criticism of my fellow students. When things are working well, it might even be detrimental to them to ask them, hey, take some of your time and energy and dedicate it to something else. I don't want to take away from their experiences like that. And I think we took that into consideration. We tried to make it pretty hands-off for everybody else. Just give us a vote and we'll do the rest. But I think, and I do think the process, you'll be happy to know, I think the process should be continued. I don't intend to step away from it. I may need to take a smaller role in it, but I don't think we should stop. I think we should pick it up again in the fall. And maybe we just make it a little bit more easy for them, more easy for them. Maybe we just make it a little bit easier for them. We have to adjust to the population we have. We can't give up, because I would hate to get into a situation where, again, we feel like we need to pivot or work with the admin and we can't. That would be bad. But like I said, you know, I don't want to hurt a good thing. I don't want to rock the boat so much that it's disrupting lives. I think an incoming first year class will be a good opportunity to get our message out and also to get feedback. That was another thing, is we gave the opportunity for a lot of feedback and we didn't receive very much. I think maybe we could be a little bit more purposeful about taking feedback from people, right? Again, I'm not going to barge into your lab and take an hour of your time, but finding out what would it take for you to care about this, right? What will it take for you to come out and vote for it? Maybe it's something we could do better. And clearly it's my opinion that this is what's best for everybody. I think the committee would all pretty much agree with that, but we also have to be open to the possibility that as a student body, as a department, that it's just not a priority for us, and that's okay. If we get into this theoretical doomsday scenario that I'm talking about, when the administration decides suddenly they don't pay our tuition anymore and that we only have 3 years to finish the PhD, when that day comes,
everyone's going to vote.
We can fight it. Yeah, we'll be ready. We're smart, capable people who have a lot of experience under our belts. You know, we've all been to college before. We know how these things work. So, you know, maybe I'm a pessimist and maybe I'm just pushing for it when it's not needed yet. But I think there's a happy medium between help us out, give us a little bit of your time, and, you know, this isn't a priority. There's a happy middle ground somewhere.
Hypothetically, were this situation, like you were drafting something back at Emory, what do you think would have been the response? This question comes because I want you to sort of contrast these two places.
You know, I can kind of give you an example of that, actually. So it's not exactly the same thing, but at Emory I worked heavily in the honor council there, which is that's the group that handles and adjudicates academic dishonesty cases. So when people are caught cheating, plagiarizing, they go before a panel of students and faculty and we figure it out. So I was very involved in that organization, and I actually got the opportunity to serve on a committee of deans and faculty and staff and students, just all kinds of people from every college at Emory. So Emory has a nursing school, a business school, a public health school. We all came together to try and kind of sync things up to make sure that our honor codes were working in the same way. And that was very much a question that they had for me. I was the student representative of the sort of the liberal arts college, Emory College of Arts and Sciences there. That was a question they posed to me, is if we're going to make these changes, we're going to need student approval. Like, we're not going to do all this and just not tell anybody about it. And their question to me was, are people going to care? And my honest answer for them was, some people are going to care. I imagine it's hard to compare because Emory's physics department is so very small, but knowing some of their other graduate departments, I do think it might have had a little more interest there for the reasons I stated before. I think Emory tends to be a little bit more politically interested than University of Houston. I think part of the reason for that is that maybe more in the undergraduate population, but a lot of University of Houston students are returning for second degrees, they're commuting, they have families. To me, it strikes me very much as a school to, like, live your dreams, kind of, right? You know, come back, get that education that you've always wanted. And so I think that might influence the politics of U of H to be a little bit less, maybe intense is almost the right word. I mean, these are people's lives, right? Their education clearly matters a lot to them. But I think a lot of, even the students in our department don't have this kind of sense of, you know, this is the first degree I'm getting, this has to be right, this is my whole career in front of me. Emory is also a private university, and so it is not beholden to the politics of its state like University of Houston is. There are some things that if we don't like it, that's tough. You know, I think you guys get the emails I do that go out to the staff from the legal counsel that say, hey, this is changing in the law, so just be ready. You're going to have to do this and that.
Yeah.
Emory doesn't have that. They can kind of do what they want, and so it behooves them to be engaged politically so they can know what's coming, what they have to adapt, or they'll just fall behind.
Right.
Double-edged sword, right? That also means they can make mistakes and make dumb decisions that we can't. But yeah, so the students also just, there were a couple, I hesitate to call them political scandals amongst the student government at Emory while I was there, which raised student engagement in things. You know, there's always these big flashy headlines about this member of the student council is getting removed or whatever. So, you know, I love University of Houston, but at least in our department, I just don't think people are as interested, at least right now, in having those types of discussions. And that also might be because it's a graduate program. At this point in our lives, we're worried a lot more about our jobs. maybe in ways less of a philosophical approach. As an undergraduate, and I'm sure you two would share this experience, as an undergrad, you have all these big thoughts and ideas about the world, and you're not there just to get your degree. You're there to change the world and become a whole human being, which is great. That's the point of college. But I think, for better or for worse, I think you lose a little bit of that sparkle when you go to grad school. And maybe it's just because you have to specialize.
Yeah.
You don't have time to take other classes and get as many other perspectives. But maybe that's why the engagement is lower too, is just, look, I'm so close to the degree at this point. I'm here to work through it. If the system is crunchy and difficult to get through, maybe that's just a reality I'm going to deal with. But I still think we'd be better served fixing it for the better, for the people behind us.
I feel since in graduate school, the experience that students in the same year, like the difference in experience that we have. So first year, we're all doing the same stuff. But as soon as we start on our research, some have RAs, some are going to be doing TAs. Some TA jobs are different than others. So the experience varies so much in the same year. And it just becomes big when the years are different. So I feel some people especially, so before this, I thought that I will be TAing forever. And for me, it was important to devote my time in changing how the whole TA works, or how should I be teaching, or should I be teaching this way or not. But someone who's not a TA, who's just doing RA, for them, the matters does not seem that important. And I feel that's one of the reasons that in graduate school, a lot of people are not, actively spending their time in doing things apart from their work.
Yeah.
And obviously, because now we're all grown up and we've seen life, so that, like you said, the spark dies. And people have started to live with the fact that, okay, this is reality. This is what I have to be with. This is how it's going to be. And the thought that I want to change the world, and I want to do this, and I want to do that, that somehow dims our perspective. And then we just think that, let's just get over with it. Let's just get our degrees and move forward.
And we're not completely at fault for that. The advantage to that is you get the degree, you put yourself in a stable career, and as my dad would say, as his dad would say, either I pay for you now or I pay for you for the rest of my life, right? If I set myself up now for a good future, I will not have to worry 10 years down the road. I'm not going to be worrying about what was I doing in grad school. And I think you hit on a really good point. Even logistically, our lives are so different in second, third, fourth year. It can just be hard to get a hold of everybody. Like we were sending out emails and Teams messages. And honestly, I think part of our problem is there's probably a decent, even 10 or 15 people that probably saw not a single one of those communications. And that's enough votes to make a big difference in our department. How we reach those people, I don't know. The Center for Superconductivity might as well be on a different planet at this point, and with this heat, that no one's walking back and forth between our buildings, so there's just no way to contact those people. But you're right. I mean, again, logistically, it's hard to get track, but just because our experiences change, we all know colleagues who their advisors just have so much work for them to do. As soon as you're done with your first year, you could lock yourself in that office and get the PhD in like a year if you needed to. I mean, for some people, the path forward is so clear that it's not that they don't care about what we're doing. It's not that they don't care about future grad students or even their fellow grad students. It's just not necessary for them. They may not even know about some of the issues. Think about the attendance at the student general body meetings. It's pretty good for our department, I feel like. Yeah. But it's a lot of the same faces every time. Yeah. And even for those of us in the meeting who have everything figured out right now, we're still going to come to those meetings because we're interested and we care and we like to talk about these things. Right. But I mean, there are people who are in my first year classes that I haven't seen a single time since leaving those first year classes. And I know they didn't leave the program. They just have their work cut out from them. And again, I don't want to hurt those people. I don't want to take away their time. But if all we're asking for is their participation and their opinion on something, I don't really have qualms about it. But you've hit the nail on the head there. Is even to get them to vote on it, you have to get them to care a little bit. Yes. And if it's just not relevant to their lives, can I really blame them for being checked out of it? No.
So, Daniel, as a graduate student, we've talked about a lot of things. You must also encounter diverse perspectives within your academic community. Like we've been talking, we have such a diverse department. So how do you handle discussions on politically sensitive topics? And like you were talking about that, you see that there's hesitation amongst your fellow students. Do you find yourself hesitant in sharing your political views in lieu of a conflict?
You know what's really interesting for me? I find myself less hesitant to share my perspectives with more diverse groups. And I think the reason for that is because a lot of my friends that I've made in this program are not from the United States, and therefore don't carry assumptions, biases, or predetermined opinions on some political opportunities. Especially with some of my closer international student friends, I am not afraid to just lay into my opinion on them. And it's kind of cathartic sometimes. It feels like, you know, this is going to sound really mean when I say it, but it's like talking to a wall sometimes. It's like, there's nothing I'm going to say. We're going to be like, oh my God, Daniel, I can't believe you have that opinion about something. Now, granted, it also comes with the advantage of getting very different perspectives. Like I remember having a good conversation over dinner about the way that elections are run. And it was super interesting to hear about. We were talking a little bit about like state elections in India and that kind of thing. And the fingerprint thing. I think that's so cool. So I find myself less hesitant. Now that's maybe a little bit more towards my personal life. You know, when I'm on the clock, I'm probably not going to be, you're not going to find me in my lab going on a rant about educational policy or something. But with you guys, or like I said, the majority of the friends that I've made in this program, it's very freeing. I do worry a little bit. I don't want to color your opinions too much. You know, I don't want someone who has just moved to the United States, I don't want them to think that they have to think just like me, even though I'd love for them to think just like me. But it's been a really valuable space for me to learn and share. It can get a little disheartening when I kind of snap back into Texas reality. You know, when I'm with groups of people who are from here, or, you know, when I engage with local politics, when I vote in the elections here, when I read the news here, it's a little bit less fun in that case. You know, as a young person, not making a whole lot of money, it's probably best for me to just kind of stay the course, right? I want to keep my job and I want to finish my degree and all that. So I'm not about to, like, you know, reinvent the wheel and go off on some crazy political quest to find myself or something like that. But it's been a very different experience for my adult life, this community, and I'm very grateful for it. I think it will, you know, help me have better perspectives going forward. Although, like I said, does also sometimes let me drive deeply into my opinions.
But how do you sort of you know, evade such conflicts? How do you,
yeah.
Okay, blunt question: how do you still maintain friendship having different political opinions?
Yeah, so maybe I should clarify. When I go on these rants to friends, you know, you got to figure out beforehand where they stand on things.
Right.
The most fun I have is when I find out an issue that you don't have in another country. And then I'm like, all right, crack my knuckles, let's get into this, right? Like we were talking about health insurance earlier. Sure, there are issues with health insurance all over the globe, but I think many people would agree America has a particularly big issue with health insurance. When it comes to something like that, I'll talk all day without fear of, you know, stepping on toes from a more diverse crowd. Now, with my, you know, fellow domestic students, with coworkers that I know from my collaboration who are in the United States, I really don't talk about it much at all. I mean, I really would have to build much more of a personal relationship to begin to talk about it. I'm no exception to that hesitation to get engaged with it. And part of that's kind of a social construct that I won't say if it's good or bad, but, you know, you don't talk politics at the table, right? It's not during business hours. You keep it out of work. There's definitely some good that comes from that. You need to focus on your work and not make people mad and that kind of stuff. But it's still a question that I haven't answered from my days of engaging with astrophysics is where am I going to fit into this in a position that I can feel like I'm really affecting change and doing something? Because I have lots of strongly held beliefs and opinions, and I know myself well enough to know that I would be uncomfortable in later life if I felt like I was, you know, just contributing to some dead end, right? Like, sure, I'm launching probes into the sun, but who cares? You know, I would feel remiss if that's what I felt like my career came to. Maybe now is the time to answer that question, or maybe it hasn't quite come yet. Maybe I just keep my eyes open for opportunities, but I think I do kind of keep quiet on it. You know, with you guys, on a more personal level, and even with some of my colleagues and coworkers, I will engage on it. But even I am not brave enough always to have those conversations.
But what would your advice be to someone who is afraid of sharing their political views, knowing that it may or may not end up in a conflict and, sometimes end friendships?
Yeah.
Or if someone's alone in a group of, and the person has like a completely different political...
They're singled out.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say be careful for sure. I think that,
Do you agree it's fair that people put their political opinions above friendship?
Oh, in some cases, absolutely. Let me say this. I know this is a cop-out answer, but it's too broad of a question. If we're talking about political things like my opinion on the economy or even things like educational policy, though my beliefs are strongly held, hearing countering beliefs are not going to affect how I feel about you as a person or our relationship. Could I get into a fight with somebody over it? Absolutely. But I know that fight, that disagreement, or the whatever effect it has even on a professional relationship is just from a difference in opinion, right? Or it could be something as simple as a difference of how we were raised, right? I was raised with this type of economics in mind, you were raised with that type. That certainly is not worth losing friendships or relationships over. I then have to hesitate a little bit because there are beliefs I have, there are facets of my life that are, to me, not just political opinions that I have. I mean, there are people in my life whose well-beings are affected by policy matters that happen in this country. Even the rant I went on earlier about health insurance. I mean, sure, I have strong opinions about it, and that's probably not something I'd lose a friendship over. But from my work in the medical field, I was very directly exposed to countering viewpoints that were challenging, that were difficult to me. And so my answer to that is, you have to know how important it is to you. Only you can answer, is it worth jeopardizing a relationship for? And if it is, then it is. There are some things in my life that no matter how much I like my job, my career at U of H, I would sacrifice it all in a minute if it meant standing up for certain things that I believe in. Are those things taxes and such? No, absolutely not. Educational policy, anything that I've said today into the microphone, I'd say again, and I don't think would come between me and anyone, and if it did, I wouldn't hold it personally against them.
Very well said.
Thank you.
So, as you pursue your career in physics, do you see yourself being involved in political, ideological discussions and policy making in the future? And if yes, what do you think? In which capacity do you envision yourself?
Yeah, I'm not saying it's necessarily something that I'm like planning on doing, but I'm certainly not allergic to the idea. I'll make the analogy. I had not had any exposure to teaching before coming here and being a TA. I would never have said I didn't want to be a teacher. It just wasn't something that I'd engaged with. And after having taught, I loved it. And now I would certainly consider being a teacher. I will pursue my options. I'll look for the possibilities. I've always been interested in working in government labs. I'm here in Houston. It's no accident that NASA's down the road from me. I put myself here for, very good reason. And that's the part of my future where I can see myself becoming involved. I always want to be in the lab. I always want to have, my hands dirty, be working with stuff, but I wouldn't be afraid to take an administrative position that involves speaking up. I mean, with funding sources, a lot of acquiring funding is just making someone believe you're important. What is that if not politics, right? And that could very much be determined by what a current political administration is interested in, right? If the man or woman in charge doesn't care about the environment, your environmental policy proposal is not going to go anywhere. And so I could see myself being interested in advocating for work under, in my collaboration or under my umbrella as to its importance if I feel passionate about it, for sure.
Interesting.
Let's talk about dark matter.
Yes.
Yes, let's talk about your research now.
Sure.
So you work in the experimental physics group, especially the one concerned with dark matter detection. So dark matter is perhaps one of the most mysterious and intriguing concepts in
It is, perhaps.
astrophysics.
Mhm.
So, how about you tell our listeners what is dark matter and why is it crucial? Why is it a crucial topic of study in both theoretical and experimental cosmology?
All right, you'll have to cut me off at some point, I'm sure, because this could go on. So, my introduction to dark matter is always, it's something that we are confident exists for a lot of reasons, and I'll go briefly into some of those reasons. But it would be maybe a reach to say we have proof or that we know. We have evidence. We've got plenty of evidence that suggests its existence, but we're still chasing that elusive aha, in all likelihood, Nobel Prize winning moment where we can do it. You know, the Higgs boson was theorized before it was finally recorded, right? And that was monumental. So we're at the stage where we're confident enough to spend a lot of money looking for it, but we just haven't quite captured it yet. So dark matter is exactly what it sounds like. It is matter, we believe, that does not interact with light the way that regular matter does. So the only reason that we can see everything around us is because light bounces off of it or refracts through it or bends, whatever. And dark matter does not seem to do that. Now, we believe it exists. It's a lot of astrophysics, mostly gravitational reasons. We see things moving in really weird ways that don't make sense unless there's something heavy there, right? We see these clusters of galaxies that all stick very close together. But when we look at the amount of stuff that glows in it, right? So before we knew about dark matter, we figured, well, we can see matter, so if we can't see it, it's not there.
Right.
We say there are, 1,000 units of stuff we can see in this cluster. Well, that's not enough gravity to hold it together. It's moving too quickly. It should be flinging it all over the place. And it happens on a smaller scale, too, in individual galaxies, where you can say, for the amount of matter I can see in this galaxy, it should be flinging stars and planets left and right, but it's not. Something is holding it together. And I think anyone, even with a rudimentary understanding of physics, can kind of grasp this bigger, more massive, more gravity concept. So that's where it gets termed dark matter. We are, we're confident that it has the properties of matter. Something is exerting a gravitational force, but we can't see it, so it is dark. And that is really difficult for us, because we still don't have the answer as to why. Why can't we see it? If it's matter, why is it dark? Where did it come from? It may not even fit on the standard model, for all we know. There are some sort of corners of the standard model it could hide in right now, things like some very specific types of neutrinos that are still good candidates for dark matter particles. And there are also some superstructures that are made of regular matter that we hypothesize just don't emit light, things like what are called machos, which are massive compact halo objects, etc. They're made of regular matter, they just are doing something really weird, like cores of neutron stars, something that we still have not really been able to fully grasp to give them this sort of elusive property. And so this presents a great challenge to us, because it's not like there's just a bunch of dark matter, like chilling in the ocean or something that we can scoop up and study. It's out there. It's usually outer galaxy material or completely outside of a galaxy. So it's not like we can just scoop some up and bring it back. And it doesn't emit light, so traditional telescopes are out of the question. None of no James Webb, no nothing. So then the question is, well, what, how can we have our Higgs boson moment and print out this beautiful paper that we can hang our hat on and say we know for sure it exists? And bringing it to a close, as I expected I wouldn't be able to do, is that's where our group comes in. And we are one of many collaborations, and there have been many previous collaborations that have worked to build a machine. The main problem of this is sensitivity, because basically the only way we think we can interact with it is essentially through collisions, through recoils. We need to be catching dark matter and only dark matter. If anything else is getting in the detector, it's going to mess us up.
Okay.
So we need to build a detector that's incredibly sensitive, because these particles are theorized to be relatively slow moving particles, difficult to capture particles. And the problem is there are so many things out there that are just noisy, right? There are so many, neutrons bombarding the atmosphere, and even decay inside the detector can be an issue. So it has to be very sensitive, but when it's that sensitive, it picks up everything. So it also has to be isolated. That's why we bury it underground. We build a cryostat around it. We build veto systems around it. We have active and passive vetoes. Passive veto is a wall, right? You bury it under a mountain so particles can't get to it. Active veto systems are detectors that are looking for not dark matter. So something passes through your detector and your active veto at the same moment, and your active veto tells you it's a neutron. You can say, take that out of the data. That's not what we're looking for. So,
okay.
Yeah, we're part of. Well, my lab is working on the dark side collaboration. We're building. It's the third generation of our detectors. There were 2 previous dark side detectors. We're working on the next newest, biggest one in Italy, and yeah, and I mean the goalposts are there. That the first one to get that confirmation of dark matter is going to be big. There are other objectives. There are plenty of other elusive particles, even particles that we know to exist that are hard to detect, that a detector like this could be released for. Like I said, a lot of classes of neutrino are particularly difficult to work with, and this will be helpful for that as well. But it's hard to do my work without sort of that thought looming in your head. What if someone beats us to it, right? Or what if we turn it on and it doesn't work, right? Like what if we don't get that detection? And we'll still get good science out of it, but that's kind of the objective. If I may answer another part of the question as well.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, at some point you'll have to cut me off. But, the other part of the question then is, what's the point, right? Like, what's the application? We've been talking about the future. How does it contribute? I honestly do not know at this point. I believe in this project enough to dedicate myself to it. I think, first of all, it has the possibility to end the standard model. It's very possible that the particle we discover could be something that is not on there. And that would be a huge deal for the field of physics. It may not go beyond that, but I get the sense that a ripple that big, even if it's just a ripple in the field of physics, will have other consequences that I think could be revolutionary. Could we really say the Higgs boson has changed our everyday lives in the past couple of years? Probably not. But do you get the feeling deep down that it really could someday? Yeah, totally.
Slightly more details about your contribution in this grand super collaboration. So why don't you talk about detector science and what are the things that you are concerned about?
So detector science is a very collaborative art, is what I'm learning. A lot of different specialties, people who are experts in just the one most strange area of science. A lot of materials science going into it. I've become quite the engineer in the past couple months, just a lot of tinkering. A lot of software to run the thing. You need a lot of infrastructure, right? You need a building, and you need pipes and spaces for wires, and you need to get power to it. I mean, it's crazy just the different fields that dip into it. Our particular focus is on a very specific element of the grid, which is inside the TPC, time projection chamber. So I'd say probably most major particle physics detectors involve some form of TPC. It's basically just a fancy word for 3D sensor, I guess might be how I describe it. It's a thing that tells you when and where a particle did something, hit something, exploded, whatever. Right. And that's how we glean information in particle physics, is from momenta and timing and size and energy. And those are all things you can get from a TPC. So we're building a very specific component. And so part of U of H's involvement, part of my lab's involvement has been both in acquiring resources for this project. We're specifically, I think, I'm going to say things that I think I'm allowed to say. I'm not like giving away trade secrets here or anything like that. This is all like, you could find this on the Wikipedia page for the collaboration. So anyways, it requires a lot of liquid argon. And it just so happens that oil and gas drilling has the potential to produce a lot of argon. I don't know if that's always a side effect or if it can be a side effect. And it also just so happens that Houston might as well be the oil and gas capital of the United States. So we have good connections, and that's kind of one way we're involved with the project. I don't work on that so much. That's other people in my collaboration who do a lot of that. I did get to help move some heavy machinery a couple months ago, just some refinery equipment that we're getting ready, which was really cool. But in my day-to-day, I'm much more focused on some high precision electric components. So we're building some electric components for this detector.
I see.
And they're very fragile, and they're very small, and poke my fingers a lot, but it's really engaging work. I mean, there are going to be parts in this detector that I will have assembled myself, and that's cool. It sometimes is a little bit of a deviation from kind of the deep theoretical philosophical physics that we all come to know and love, when we first learned about Einstein and his papers and stuff like that. But the paying that price of being a little bit. I've always wanted to be on the experimental side, so I enjoy that. But the investment right now in sort of the construction of things will pay dividends in the theory and the data that we get out of it later.
Right. So where's the dark matter community at today? Like, what are the recent developments in the study of dark matter?
Oh, that's a good question. Not much farther than I've told you so far. So a lot of that initial gravitational evidence for dark matter was back in like the 60s and 70s.
Wow.
We've had a good idea it was there for a long time. We've crossed off a lot of candidates in the past few decades. We've looked at, I'll say the word neutrino again. We've looked at some neutrino possibilities that we don't think are dark matter. The big hot topic right now is what are called WIMPs, weakly interacting massive particles. Yep. Those are right now the most, and that's just a category of particle. That's not like one specific particle. It could apply. In fact, some neutrinos are WIMPs, for example. That's kind of, most dark matter scientists agree those are the types of particles we need to be looking for. So weakly interacting, they interact via the weak interaction. Massive particles, dark matter, it's matter, it has mass. And those generally are sort of slower, heavier particles, which crosses off some standard model particles that are just too quick, too zippy. And they have to be slow and large because otherwise they don't cluster together and give you those gravitational effects. So getting back to the question you asked, a lot of detectors being built right now, actually. There are a lot of collaborations going on right now. It's not that there's nothing more we can do, but I really think that most focuses are on that detection, that actual interaction inside a detector with a dark matter particle. Right. We could definitely, there are some more candidates we could cross off. Some people have started to venture into some theories like supersymmetry. SUSY particles have been proposed as possible dark matter candidates. So I think the theorists still have plenty of work, plenty of stuff to chew on. Right. The problem is they could do that for the rest of their lives, propose this particle, that particle. Axions were proposed as a possible candidate for dark matter. I feel bad. The theorists, they're going to drive themselves nuts just looking, making up new particles, finding conditions under which known particles could be dark matter. I feel right now it's a field in which, and we need those theorists, because if our detector, if we turn it on and nothing happens, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and go to them and say, okay, how do you catch an axion, right? If it exists, how do you catch a selectron? That's a SUSY particle for you. But I think right now, I think it's kind of, we're going to catch a WIMP that's going to be dark matter, or a lot of restructuring is going to happen. I'm relatively new in the field. I don't necessarily have my finger on the pulse of that, but from the work my colleagues are doing and their colleagues are doing, a lot of us are doing the same thing right now, which is, let's get this up and running, let's build it bigger, better, and, we're only a couple years from, okay, time for a new approach if this doesn't work.
Yeah, I pretty much share like a similar view that I feel that the theory has done what it has, and it's time for, like you said, a lot of detectors. Like we really, really need like an experimental advancement in the dark matter.
And it's always unfortunate when you get stuck one way or the other, right? Like you've got all this data and you have no idea what to do with it until some brilliant theorist comes along and puts it all together, or you know what you're looking for, you just can't catch it. It's always frustrating, but I think it fosters innovation too. I think
absolutely
we're going to be working hard for the next couple of years to make sure this thing is perfect. It doesn't have mistakes or flaws in it that are causing us not to get data if we're not getting data. And if we are getting data, things will swing back the other way, and we'll say, oh, okay, what do you make of this? Somebody needs to add a new little rectangle to the standard model or something, and Lord knows I'm not going to be the one to do that. So I agree with your analysis. Like I said, some of those discoveries, those gravitational studies, names to know if you're interested, are Vera Rubin and Fritz Zwicky. Those are like 1960s, 70s discoveries.
Yeah, exactly. That's
and there's been a lot of, like I said, there's been progress since then. We've crossed off regular matter, right?
Yeah.
It's not, other than the machos and things, but we know it's not naked protons and neutrons, right? We know it's not electrons. We know it's not this and that. We've even narrowed down in the WIMP category. We've got some energy ranges of WIMPs that were like, these are just too quick, right? They're too hot. They can't, they're just not dark matter.
Right.
So we've narrowed things down a good bit. And a lot of that has come through detector work. Some A lot of the experiments that are sort of legendary in my field are actually neutrino experiments. That's a lot of the predecessors for our work because neutrinos are so hard to capture, the detectors. So, things like Snow Lab, Ray Davis is a big name in that field. So these are, again, if you're interested, experiments to look at and names to look at. Kamiokande and Super Kamiokande.
This is the one in Japan, right?
Yeah, those, I mean, like these experiments, they wrote the book on neutrino detection, and so we take a lot of our experience from them. We build similar detectors, and we have similar challenges to them. And so those experiments have paved the way for the work that I'm doing today, but we haven't found it yet. So it's kind of an enticing prospect to get into the field. If they find it tomorrow, I'm going to be a little disappointed in my career choice. I'll just say, I won't really. That's not true. I would be so happy for someone to make a detection, because then my work would just shift towards repetition. Repeat the findings.
Yeah, that's right.
Process the data. Can we get more of it? Can we get a better signal? So,
but I still feel the work in dark matter has, it's really fast. This crossing of candidates has become so fast. I remember every time I study about dark matter, there's always a new candidate.
Yeah.
So when we were in Durham in 2019, 2018, at that time, dark matter candidate was neutrinos.
Yes.
And it's interesting to know that physicists are working so hard and so fast at, crossing off different candidates from their list. And I feel the field needs a major detection.
Well, lastly, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say it's I'm sorry, the fire truck made me lose my train of thought. I was just going to say on that note that we're not even done crossing off neutrinos. There are still types that they think could be. So and like I said, in terms of physics, the 60s and 70s was not that long ago. If you think about the progress that was made from 1900 to 1950, we changed everything we knew, and then things slowed down a little bit after that. And granted, I'm speaking from the fields I'm familiar with, so if your field had a huge discovery in 1974, I'm sorry, but we have this revolution in with Einstein in the early 1900s,
turn of the century, and then up until
the Manhattan Project, and then in the last 50 years or so. We have the Higgs. Okay, now I'm contradicting myself. We have the Higgs boson and all that, but still, it's funny to me. In terms of physics, I feel like the 60s are yesterday, right? It's let's say at least in the field of dark matter,
That's right.
It's not like so much has happened. We were confident in those numbers even then. At first, Zwicky says dark matter, and people are like, "What are you talking about?" But Vera Rubin comes after him, and it's pretty much a sure thing. That's why when I started talking about this, I say, I don't want to say we know it exists. We don't know it exists, but pretty much know it exists, and that's part of what makes it frustrating. These numbers are good. The data is there. Something is out there. And to not really be able to bring it home is so interesting.
Well, Daniel, lastly, what are some of your academic and non-academic goals that you would like to achieve by the end of your PhD?
Well, I'd like to get it in the next few years. That's probably thing number one.
Yay.
I like Houston a lot, but it is too hot. I cannot stay here for 7 more years. So personal goals, I'm always picking up new hobbies. I did that so much in college. I picked up so many random hobbies. I've got to get back on that again. And I think I'll have more opportunity for that now that some of my courses are out of the way. Also academically, I think just building connections. That's been something that's been so pleasantly surprising to me about PhD work is how quickly I've been accepted by, I say my peers, but I didn't consider them my peers previously, and I'm lucky to consider them my peers now. People who have been in physics longer than I've been alive, who call me by my first name and send me emails once a week, and I that's something that I'd like to expand on in my academic career is I still am probably leaning towards a career maybe in industry if I can. I'd like to work in, like I said, I think I really like government research because to me it hits that sweet spot between, it's industry, but it's not, I'm not doing it to make someone money. I'm doing it for interesting research reasons. And I think connections will be valuable for that as well. I have a lot of colleagues on my current project who are at national labs, even in other countries.
That's very important.
Yeah, and it's really cool just to meet them and talk with them and just kind of collaborate with them. So that's another thing that I'd like to continue. And get this goddamn Constitution passed at some point, if we can. If it's in the cards. If not, it's fine. So. Yeah.
Well, thanks for celebrating your birthday with us.
Oh, you guys, thank you so much for having me. I've never been on a podcast before, and it's an honor to be on yours.
Thank you for doing this, Dan.
Happy birthday to you.